The Unseen Battle, Rise of the Silent Dreamer. In the small, dusty town of Mirpur, where the sun scorched the earth and dreams often withered under the weight of practicality, lived a young man named Ayaan. At 19, Ayaan was a shadow among his peers, quiet, unassuming, with eyes that held stories he never dared to share. His lanky frame and perpetually tousled hair made him blend into the background, a silent observer in a world that rewarded the loud and the bold. But beneath his reserved exterior burned a dream so vivid it both thrilled and terrified him. Ayaan wanted to become a powerful public speaker, a voice that could move hearts and inspire change. For as long as he could remember, words had been Ayaan's refuge. He devoured books, scribbled poetry in the margins of his notebooks, and whispered speeches to the mirror when no one was around. In his mind, he stood on grand stages, his voice steady and commanding, weaving stories that left audiences spellbound. But in reality, the mere thought of speaking in front of others sent his heart racing and his palms sweating. His tongue would tangle, his throat would tighten, and his words would vanish like smoke. Ayaan's fear of public speaking was a wall he couldn't climb, a silent battle he fought alone. Life in Mirpur didn't make things easier. Ayaan's family ran a modest grocery store, and his parents, weathered by years of hard work, had clear expectations for their only son. "Become an accountant, Ayaan," his father would say, his voice firm but kind. "It's safe, respectable. Dreams of speaking won't feed you." His mother, though gentler, echoed the sentiment, her eyes filled with worry whenever Ayaan mentioned his aspirations. "People like us don't stand on stages," she'd say. "We build lives with our hands, not our words." At college, Ayaan's quiet nature made him a target. His classmates, with their boisterous laughter and quick wit, nicknamed him Mute Ayaan. They mocked his stammer when he was called on in class, their snickers cutting deeper than he let on. Each jab fueled the voice in his head, the one that whispered, "You're not good enough. You'll never be enough." Yet every night, Ayaan would retreat to his room, pull out his notebook, and write speeches about courage, hope, and dreams. He'd practice in whispers, his voice trembling but resolute, as if he could will his fear away. One day, a flyer pinned to the college notice board changed everything. It announced a regional public speaking competition, with the winner earning a scholarship to a prestigious communication program in the city. Ayaan's heart leapt, but his stomach churned. This was his chance, a real stage, a real audience. But the thought of standing under bright lights, with hundreds of eyes on him, made his knees weak. He tore his gaze from the flyer and walked away, the voice in his head sneering, "You'll fail. They'll laugh." That night, unable to sleep, Ayaan sat by his window, staring at the stars. He thought of his grandfather, a man who died before Ayaan was born, but whose stories lived on in family lore. His grandfather had been a storyteller, weaving tales for the village under a banyan tree. "He spoke with his heart," Ayaan's mother once said, "and people listened because they felt his truth." Ayaan wondered if he could ever find that kind of courage. The next morning, he made a decision. He would enter the competition, not because he believed he could win, but because he was tired of letting fear define him. He signed up in secret, not telling his parents or friends. For weeks, he prepared in the quiet of his room, practicing in front of his mirror, his voice shaking but growing steadier. He wrote a speech about the unseen battles people fight, the doubts, the fears, the dreams they hide. He poured his heart into every word, drawing from his own struggles, but preparation couldn't erase the obstacles. His parents found out when they overheard him practicing one evening. "Ayaan, this is nonsense," his father snapped. "You're throwing away a stable future for a fantasy." His mother's silence was worse, her eyes heavy with disappointment. At college, his classmates caught wind of his entry and taunted him relentlessly. "Mute Ayaan on a stage? This I've got to see," one jeered. The voice in his head grew louder, urging him to quit. The day of the competition arrived, a crisp morning that felt heavier than it should. The auditorium was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. Ayaan sat in the back, clutching his speech, his hands trembling. As each contestant took the stage, confident, polished, their voices ringing out, Ayaan's resolve wavered. "What am I doing here?" he thought. He was about to slip out when his name was called. His legs felt like lead as he walked to the stage. The spotlight blinded him, and the sea of faces blurred into a haze. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure the audience could hear it. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. The silence stretched, agonisy, and a few whispers rippled through the crowd. Ayaan's mind screamed, "Run! You're a failure." Then he remembered his grandfather's stories. He thought of the banyan tree, the villagers listening in rapt silence. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began. "We all fight battles no one sees," he said, his voice soft but clear. The words came haltingly at first, but as he spoke of the fears that had chained him, the doubts that had silenced him, something shifted. His voice grew stronger, his words flowing like a river breaking free. He spoke of dreams that refuse to die, of the courage it takes to stand up despite the weight of the world. The audience leaned in, their eyes locked on him, not with judgment but with something else. Connection. When he finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat before erupting in applause. Ayaan stood frozen, stunned, as tears pricked his eyes. He didn't win the competition. That honor went to a polished speaker with years of experience, but the judges gave him a special mention for raw authenticity. More importantly, Ayaan felt something new. Pride. For the first time, he'd faced his fear and won. The journey didn't end there. His parents, who'd watched from the back, began to see their son differently. His father's stern words softened into quiet support, and his mother's worry gave way to tentative encouragement. His classmates' mockery faded, replaced by grudging respect. Ayaan joined a local speaking club where he practiced weekly, his voice growing steadier, his confidence blooming. The voice in his head, the one that had told him he wasn't enough, began to quiet, drowned out by the sound of his own words. Years later, Ayaan stood on a stage in the city, addressing a crowd of thousands. He was no longer the silent boy from Mirpur. He was a speaker, a storyteller, a dreamer who had fought his unseen battle and risen. His message was simple but powerful. Your fears don't define you. Your dreams do. Keep fighting, even when no one sees. And in the audience, a young girl sat, wide-eyed, clutching a notebook filled with her own unspoken words. Inspired by Ayaan's story, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I can too." Years had passed since Ayaan's first trembling steps onto the stage in Mirpur, but the memory of that day remained a cornerstone of his journey. Now 25, Ayaan had carved a path few in his small town could have imagined. He lived in the bustling city of Lahore, where he worked as a communication coach, helping others find their voices just as he had found his. His days were filled with workshops, mentoring sessions, and the occasional keynote speech at regional events. Yet, despite his progress, the silent dreamer still carried unseen battles, new challenges that tested the courage he'd fought so hard to build. Ayaan's life in the city was a far cry from Mirpur's dusty streets. His small apartment overlooked a chaotic sprawl of lights and noise, a constant reminder of how far he'd come. His parents, once skeptical, now bragged about their son to anyone who'd listen, though they still urged him to settle down, with a wife and a proper job. The mockery from his classmates was a distant memory, replaced by messages from old friends asking for advice or marveling at his transformation. But the inner voice, the one that had once told him he wasn't good enough, hadn't vanished entirely. It had evolved, whispering new doubts. "You're a fraud. You're not as good as they think. One mistake, and they'll see through you." Ayaan's latest challenge came in the form of an invitation that both thrilled and terrified him. He'd been asked to speak at the National Youth Summit, a prestigious event attended by thousands, including policymakers, influencers, and young dreamers from across Pakistan. The theme was Voices of Change, and Ayaan was to deliver the closing address, a 20-minute speech that could cement his reputation as a rising star in the speaking world. The opportunity was monumental, but so was the pressure. This wasn't a small-town competition or a local workshop. This was a stage where every word would be scrutinized, every pause magnified. As the summit approached, Ayaan threw himself into preparation. He wrote drafts upon drafts, pacing his apartment late into the night, refining his message. He wanted to speak about resilience, about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. But the more he prepared, the louder the doubts grew. What if he froze again, like he had all those years ago? What if his story wasn't enough for an audience of such magnitude? The old fear of speaking, though quieter now, crept back, tightening his chest. To ground himself, Ayaan returned to Mirpur for a weekend. The familiar sights, the grocery store, the banyan tree where his grandfather once told stories, brought a sense of calm. One evening, he visited his old college and found himself at the notice board where he'd first seen the competition flyer. Ayaan was 30 now, a name known beyond Lahore, his story a quiet legend among those who'd heard him speak. His mentorship program, Voice of the Unseen, had grown into a movement, with chapters in dozens of towns across Pakistan. He traveled tirelessly, training young dreamers to find their voices, from bustling Karachi to remote villages where ambition often felt like a luxury. Yet, even as his impact spread, Ayaan faced a new unseen battle, one that tested not his fear of speaking, but his fear of losing himself in the spotlight. Success had brought changes. His once modest apartment was now a sleek office space where he met with organizers, journalists, and aspiring speakers. His speeches drew thousands, and his inbox overflowed with invitations to international conferences. Ayaan's message of resilience and courage resonated globally, but the demands of his growing platform were relentless. Late nights blurred into early mornings, filled with emails, travel plans, and the pressure to be the inspiring figure everyone expected. The boy from Mirpur, who once whispered speeches to a mirror, sometimes felt like a stranger to the man staring back at him now. The inner voice, that old companion of doubt, had found new words to taunt him. You're spread too thin. You're not changing lives anymore. You're just performing. Ayaan dismissed it at first, but the thought lingered. His workshops were packed, his speeches applauded, but he noticed fewer moments like the one with Sana, those quiet, personal connections that had fueled his purpose. He wondered if he was still reaching the silent dreamers or merely preaching to those already convinced. The tipping point came when Ayaan was invited to speak at an international summit in Dubai, a glittering event attended by global leaders and media. It was the kind of opportunity that could elevate Voice of the Unseen to new heights, but it came with a catch. The organizers wanted a polished, crowd-pleasing speech, not the raw, vulnerable stories Ayaan was known for. Keep it light, they advised. Inspirational, but not too heavy. Ayaan agreed, but the request gnawed at him. Was he being asked to dilute his truth to fit their stage? Back in Lahore, preparing for the summit, Ayaan felt the weight of his own expectations. He sat at his desk, surrounded by crumpled drafts, struggling to write a speech that felt authentic. One night, exhausted, he pulled out Sana's letter from years ago, rereading her words. You showed me I could be brave. He thought of her journey, from a shy girl with a notebook to a poet commanding stages. Then he thought of Mirpur, of his grandfather's stories under the banyan tree, of the boy who'd once been too afraid to speak. He realized he'd been chasing bigger stages, but perhaps he'd lost sight of the smaller, truer moments that had defined him. Determined to reconnect with his purpose, Ayaan made a bold decision. He scrapped the polished speech and wrote one from the heart, one that spoke of the unseen battles behind every success, the loneliness, the compromises, the fear of losing one's way. He dedicated it to the silent dreamers who felt invisible, even in a world that celebrated them. When he took the stage in Dubai, the lights were brighter than any he'd faced, the audience a mosaic of faces from across the globe. His hands trembled, not from fear of speaking, but from the weight of bearing his soul. Fame doesn't make you brave, Ayaan began, his voice steady but raw. It's the quiet moments, when you choose truth over applause, when you speak for those who can't, that define who you are. He shared his journey, his doubts, and the temptation to trade authenticity for approval. He spoke of Sana, of Mirpur, of the banyan tree. The audience, expecting a polished performance, was silent at first, then rapt. When he finished, the applause was slower to start, but deeper, more heartfelt. Ayaan knew he'd reached them, not as a performer, but as a human. The speech didn't go viral, and some organizers grumbled about its heavy tone, but Ayaan felt lighter than he had in years. Messages poured in from attendees, young people mostly, who'd felt seen in his words. One was from a teenager in Dubai who wrote, I thought I had to be perfect to matter. You made me believe I can start where I am. Ayaan smiled, tucking the message next to Sana's letter. Returning to Lahore, Ayaan restructured Voice of the Unseen. He scaled back his speaking engagements, focusing on smaller workshops in underserved communities. He trained local mentors, empowering them to carry the movement forward. One evening, in a village not unlike Mirpur, he sat under a tree with a group of teenagers, their notebooks open, their voices hesitant, but growing. Among them was a boy who reminded Ayaan of himself, quiet, unsure, dreaming of a stage he couldn't yet imagine. As the stars appeared overhead, Ayaan shared his grandfather's stories, weaving them into lessons about courage. At 35, Ayaan stood at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated. Voice of the Unseen had grown into a national movement, with mentors in every province of Pakistan and partnerships with schools and community centers worldwide. Ayaan's name was synonymous with empowering the voiceless, his story a beacon for those who felt their dreams were too small to matter. But success had brought a new battle, one that wasn't about fear or doubt, but about legacy. Ayaan wondered, could he ensure that his movement would outlive him, carrying forward the spark he'd ignited in places like Mirpur, Dubai, and beyond? Life had changed in ways young Ayaan could never have imagined. He now lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Lahore, surrounded by books and mementos, Sana's letter, the Dubai teenager's note, and a small wooden carving of a banyan tree, a gift from a mentor in his grandfather's village. He was married to Noor, a journalist who'd first interviewed him after the Dubai summit and whose sharp mind and quiet strength grounded him. They had a daughter, Zara, a 4-year-old whirlwind who loved to perform Ayaan's speeches with exaggerated gestures, unaware of their weight. Yet, even with this fullness, Ayaan felt a restlessness. The movement was thriving, but he feared it was becoming an institution, structured, polished, at risk of losing the raw heart that had defined it. The spark for his next chapter came unexpectedly during a workshop in a remote Balochistan village. The group was small, just 10 teenagers gathered in a dusty schoolroom, but their stories hit Ayaan hard. One girl, Layla, spoke haltingly of her dream to become a lawyer, despite her family's insistence she marry young. A boy, Rahim, admitted he wrote songs but hid them, fearing ridicule in a community that valued tradition over art. Their fears echoed Ayaan's own, but their world was harsher. Poverty, isolation, and cultural barriers loomed larger than anything he'd faced in Mirpur. As he listened, the old voice of doubt crept in. You're out of touch. What can you offer them now? That night, unable to sleep, Ayaan sat with Noor on their balcony. I'm not sure I'm reaching them anymore, he confessed. I talk about courage, but their battles are bigger than mine ever were. Noor, ever perceptive, tilted her head. Maybe it's not about you reaching them. Maybe it's about them reaching each other. Her words lingered, a seed of an idea. What if Voice of the Unseen wasn't just about Ayaan's voice, or even his mentors, but about building a network where dreamers like Layla and Rahim could lift one another? Ayaan returned to the village with a new plan. Instead of leading the workshop himself, he trained Layla, Rahim, and the others to share their stories with each other, creating a space where their voices could grow. Layla spoke of her dream to fight for justice, her words shaky but fierce. Rahim sang one of his songs, his voice cracking but beautiful. The room buzzed with something new, connection, not competition. Ayaan realized this was the future of his movement, not a top-down mission, but a community where silent dreamers became each other's strength. Over the next year, Ayaan restructured Voice of the Unseen to focus on peer-led circles. He stepped back from the spotlight, training local leaders like Layla and Rahim to run workshops in their communities. The movement spread organically, from villages to cities, each circle a small banyan tree where stories took root. Ayaan still spoke occasionally, but his greatest joy came from watching others rise. At a national gathering of voice mentors, he saw Layla, now a law student, deliver a speech that left the room in tears. Rahim performed a song that had the audience on their feet. Ayaan, watching from the back, felt a lump in his throat, not from fear, but from pride. The restlessness didn't vanish entirely. There were moments when Ayaan wondered if he'd stepped back too far, if the movement needed his voice as much as it needed others. But Zara, now 6, unknowingly anchored him. One evening, as he tucked her into bed, she asked, Baba, why do you help people talk? Ayaan smiled, brushing her hair back. Because everyone has a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Zara nodded, clutching a notebook where she'd scribbled her own speeches. In her eyes, Ayaan saw the same spark he'd seen in Sana, in Layla, in himself. Years later, at a global Voice of the Unseen summit, Ayaan stood before a diverse crowd, mentors from Pakistan, India, Nigeria, Brazil, each carrying their own unseen battles. He was older now, his hair flecked with gray, but his voice carried the same fire. This movement isn't mine, he said. It belongs to every silent dreamer who dares to speak. Keep telling your stories. They're the roots of change. As he stepped off the stage, a young mentor from Balochistan approached him.